Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and get started. Sorry to keep you waiting. Since Chairman Irwin's outside, I won't say anything bad about him, but he held us up in just a painstaking education committee meeting, so our quorum was waiting there. But we have 4 presentations today. Members of the committee, you should have a copy of the FY24 amended budget in front of you. And Representative Wade, would you mind opening us in a word of prayer?
Not a problem. If you'll bow with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Bless this day and our work, all those that are gathered here on the betterment of this state, our children, and also in protection of the taxpayers that we all represent. Thank you for allowing us to be here to do this work and guide and protect us each and every day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. So I was going to start by just having a show of hands of how many of you have an appropriations request in the amended budget, but I was afraid it might look like the wave in here, so we'll dispense with that and jump straight into this. So Commissioner Jacobs, if you will join us at the podium, we'll turn the microphone over to you, and if you will, for members of the committee today, we are just looking at changes that are in the amended budget, and have asked our 4 presenters just to focus on those items. But Commissioner, the microphone is yours, the floor is yours, and we're all ears.
Okay, thank you so much, and good afternoon to the committee. It's nice to be a little bit warmer today than it was last week, but it's good to be with you. So we do have a few changes in the amended FY24 budget. We are on the first page of your tracking sheet. And the first program where there are changes is in the nutrition services, which is 22.2.2 is the first item, which is to provide startup grants of $10,000 to establish additional summer food service program meal sites in areas with high rates of child food insecurity. You may remember that DECAL runs 2 food programs that's administered by, we administer 2 USDA food programs, and one of them is a summer food program which we call Happy Helpings, and it provides meals to school-age students in the summer. And so we need nonprofit partners all over the state to provide those meals. We then reimburse for those meals. One of the barriers to becoming a nonprofit sponsor is startup cost, and so we've had some success in the past with some one-time state dollars that allowed us to provide some grants, about 22 grants to some nonprofits, which resulted in 112,000 additional meals in 27 unserved or underserved counties. So we appreciate this add of the $100,000 to help with some barriers to food service in underserved counties. The next item are in the pre-K program, so 22.3.2. Is an increase in funds to reflect the correct employer contribution rate for SHPP of $1.3 million. The SHPP employer rate was increased last year, and this is just a true-up of what's actually needed for public school teachers and public schools to pay for their teachers' SHPP of $1.3 million. The next item is 22.3.3, which is an increase of $6.1 million to expand the summer transition program. So our summer transition program is part of our Georgia Pre-K program. It's a 5-week program in the summer for either rising kindergarten students or rising Pre-K students that need extra support before they enter Pre-K or kindergarten. And this addition of $6.1 million will allow us to serve about 3,300 students in 288 classes across the state. So it is much smaller than Georgia Pre-K, but we actually have really good results in just 5 weeks of giving these students that extra month before they enter pre-kindergarten or kindergarten. And then the final adjustment is 22.3.4, which is an additional $99,000 for a computer refresh for our pre-K staff. So for our pre-K staff that work out with teachers every day, and then our small staff that works at DECAL. We haven't had a refresh since 2019, and so these are funds to allow us to do that. And those are all of our changes for the amended budget.
Any questions from the committee for the commissioner? Okay. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll turn to Department of Education. Rusk, if you want to come on up. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, we don't have a lot of changes, but I'll go through some of the significant ones. Rather than go line by line, you'll notice in our various programs we did have the $1,000 supplement for state and federal employees included in there. On 24.16.2, you'll see a adjustment of funds to reflect the data correction for Burke County. This is about $884,000. On section 24.17.1, you'll see the big $190 million. Basically, right there it's 143, but if you add the other additional QBE earnings, this is the supplement that went out was announced in December, and we gave the districts till January 31st to get the $1,000 supplement to all QBE earned positions, which also included custodians, bus drivers, nutrition workers, GNETs, and RESA staff. You'll notice the increase 24.17.2 and some of the other enrollment increases. If you saw my presentation last week, overall FTEs was relatively flat with about 785. However, we did see growth in some of our more expensive categories such as special ed, gifted, ESOL programs. So that's why you see the increase in enrollments. There's an increase in the charter school supplements because we had 8 new charter schools and enrollment growth. That is line 24.17.1.4. And then you'll also see a significant change in our 24.17.5, which is in our special needs scholarship. This is actually a formula that's based on actual payments. In our first 2 payments, we were projecting about a $9 million shortfall in that scholarship. You'll see a restoration in 24.17.8 for Mountain Ed and Coastal Plains due to the establishment of a completion special school. This was about $15 million. And actually, that's all the major changes that we had in our amended budget. Questions?
Any questions from the committee? If I could just, Chairman Dickey, is that you?
Yes, me. Like, just expand a little bit on that Mountain Education Charter High School and Coastal as a completion special school. Could you explain that just to me just a little bit?
Yeah, Tiffany, do you want to? I'll let Tiffany. She's our charter school deputy. That's her in her wheelhouse, so I'll let her explain that better.
Thank you. So during the 2023 legislative session, House Bill 87 transitioned Coastal Plains and Mountain Ed from state charter schools to completion special schools, which means that they no longer receive the state charter school supplement. And also a part of that change from that year in the fiscal year 24 budget amended or adjusted then their FTE amount that they would have received for that year. So this adjustment just puts the funding that they would have received for fiscal year 24 back into the budget just to make them whole for fiscal year 24.
Okay, thank you. Good explanation. But could you refresh my memory what a completion special school is?
Yes, so a completion special school is a school that serves students in grades 9 through 12 and provides them with non-traditional programs and services. They serve as an LEA, a standalone school for students who are 18 years of age and older and have already dropped out of high school.
Yeah.
But they also serve as a program for LEAs for any other students under the age of 18 that have not dropped out that want to receive those services from that school.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Dickey. Any other questions from the committee? I have 2.
Yes, sir.
One, the testing, the additional monies for the testing. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, the $292,000. It's kind of a as we stated in our last hearing, we're about $7.3 million short in our testing budget for 25. In our 24 2024 budget, including the PSAT and AP, if you went and you removed some of the stuff we're still in discussions with and trying to figure out, especially where that $5 million was, and what we actually supplemented with ESSER, that's where the 292 came to kind of supplement our PSAT shortfall and our AP shortfall, which we actually had a greater shortfall in those expenditures. However, we used ESSER funds to cover it.
Okay. And finally, the $1,000 supplement that you mentioned.
Yes.
You know, I had a couple of superintendents reach out to me in December, you know, when that was announced, to say, hey, we're out of school. Our staff is at home.
Mm-hmm.
We need some grace in being able to get that out. And obviously, you mentioned that by January 31st. What are you hearing from school districts? Are they telling you, hey, we're going to be able to do this? This is not a problem. We've got it covered. Or are you hearing any pushback whatsoever?
I have not heard any pushback. I don't see any. No. So no, it looks like everybody was able. We got the information out pretty quick in December, but like I said, there were actually a lot of districts that had already gone home for the holidays and had already run payroll early. So that's when we came back. We talked with the governor's office, and they were okay with us extending it till January 31st. And I have not heard anyone that couldn't get the payment out.
Okay,
So,
great. That's good to hear. Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, sir. Appreciate
you.
it. Director Potman, if you want to join us up here and speak to ERS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jim Potvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Employees Retirement System. As far as our ongoing budget items, we have no changes to the ongoing programs. Let me just get the reference numbers for you. 25.1, Deferred Compensation Program, 25.2, Georgia Military Pension Fund, 25.3, Public School Employees Retirement System, are all unchanged from the original FY24. The changes come in 25.4 under System Administration. And the headline, of course, is the $500 million that was added in the governor's proposal to essentially shore up the funding position of the system. So by way of a little bit of background, the board's stated objective and documented in our funding policy, our official funding policy, is that ERS strive to attain a 100% funded ratio. In other words, the ratio of assets to liabilities anticipated to be paid would be equal. As of our most recent valuation, which is the 6/30/2022 valuation, our funded percentage was 72.2. To go back in time a little bit, I've been the director now for 12 years next month, and our funded ratio has basically been within a pretty tight band of 71.4 to 75.6% throughout that entire period of time. Funded ratio is, generally speaking, a point in time measurement. You want to know where you are so that you know what you have to do to get where you want to be. The funding policy also states that any unfunded liabilities that we have, we would want to pay off within a 20-year period. I would represent to you that our funded position today is, in fact, stronger than it was 12 years ago when I started. And the reason is we have maintained that funding percentage while tightening up many of the actuarial assumptions that we use to calculate things like the liabilities of the system and whatnot. So as an example, our investment return assumption has been reduced from 7.5% per year to 7.1% per year. So there's two impacts there. On the asset side, of course, we're anticipating or assuming a lesser amount of investment return. So we would require a higher contribution from the state in order to kind of shore that up. But also on the liability side, that serves as our discount rate as well. And the lower the interest rate, the discount rate results in a higher calculation of liability as well. Higher, read that as more conservative, perhaps more realistic than it was in the past. We've done things like change our amortization period, the period within which we must pay off our unfunded liabilities, from 30 years, as it was years ago, to 20 years today. It used to be an open amortization period, meaning we could reset that, or we did reset it every single year. Today, we set a date, we close that date, and we say we're going to have our liabilities that we've accrued paid off by a certain date in the future. We've changed from percent of pay to level dollar. In other words, we're not any longer dependent on payroll growth to provide a higher potential contribution from the state on the back end. We want some of those dollars to come in up front. And we had to do that because for many years our payroll not only wasn't growing, it was actually shrinking by a significant amount. So we had to sever that link as well. Our experience studies, we've done 2 since I've been director, and in both cases we increased the assumption for lifespans, for mortality for our individuals to better reflect the long-term trend, perhaps not the last couple of years, but the long-term trend of people generally living longer. So we feel like we're doing a better job with that as well. And then finally, a couple of years ago, we made a decision in concert with the General Assembly and Governor's Office to begin the process of pre-funding COLAs in ERS, which we have never done before in our history. That is a very significant major step, but it also is one that comes with a cost. So if I look at the projections for the next several years, I see that while we would make incremental progress toward the ultimate goal of 100% funding, it would be just that, incremental. So 3 years from now, we would probably be in the mid-70s rather than the 72% we're at now. And that's fine for what it is. But I had a lot of conversations starting last summer with House and Senate Appropriations, the budget offices attached therein, Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. And general consensus is we'd like to jumpstart that. And there are reasons for that I will get into. But the basic consensus was that if we target 80% funded as sort of a short-term goal, that will be a springboard for us to be able to do some other things that will give us some flexibility that we don't have right now. And that's what the $500 million allocation is for. It won't get us to 80%, but it will bring us a step closer to that. I called it in the joint appropriations hearing, I called it a significant step. And what does significant mean? It means it will reduce our unfunded liability by about 9% from its current level. It means it will increase the funded ratio of the system by about 2.5% in one shot. That may not sound like a lot, but I can tell you that 2.5% would by itself represent the largest increase in the funded ratio of the system that we've seen since at least 1999. So these are not systems that change much year to year. So this actually is a big shot in the arm for us. And it would accelerate our timeline toward all of our funding goals by at least 2 years. We'd get there 2 years sooner than we're anticipating at this time. So why do this? In a nutshell, it'll enable us to break out of that band that I was talking about and take a meaningful step toward reaching our ultimate board objective of 100%. The ratings agencies, one of the 4, I believe, main categories of state finances that it looks at is debt management. And we know that the state has always been very conservative in managing things like bond issues and whatnot. And we try to be consistent with that posture as well, and this will be a step toward paying down some of that outstanding liability and hopefully get a favorable reaction from there. Risk mitigation, and by this I mean essentially a cushion against possible adverse markets that we at some point are going to face in the future. We just don't know when. So 2 years ago, we had a really fantastic year where we returned 29% investment return. That's great. The very next year, we had a negative 11.7, which pretty much balanced out to 29.2. So any of us who were wondering about an example of regression to the mean, I think we saw it that year. Last year, we had an 11.3, another pretty good year. The point is that I can't necessarily count on a string of really good investment years to get us to where we want to go, and this will provide us a cushion in case we happen to have an untimely downturn in the markets. It will help us stabilize and ultimately mitigate the future state pension cost, what we refer to as the actuarially determined employer contribution. Calculated as a percentage of payroll, we attempt to, and it's actually a stated goal of the funding policy, to keep that as steady as possible. But again, an untimely market downturn would require us to raise it in order to continue to meet our funding goals down the road. This will help us, again, mitigate against that potential outcome. It will, of course, enhance the security of future payments to all members and retirees. This is what I personally state as my number one objective as the director of the system, is to make sure that every single month for every retiree, the checks are going to be there. Not just today, not just tomorrow, but 50 years out in the future. We want to promote intergenerational equity. The way these plans work when they're at their best is that today I am paying for my benefit that I will receive in the future. When you have a significant unfunded liability, essentially you're paying for today's benefits, but you're also paying for yesterday's benefits that we're currently paying to retirees, and we want to try to balance that out a little bit as well. And then finally, it gives us a chance to improve the opportunity to make COLA payments to people in the future. The better our funded position is, the more likely we are to be able to make a COLA payment, and the better that COLA payment would be. And that's because the way we've set up our COLA funding in the system is we created a formula, again, captured within our funding policy, that basically relies on three primary factors in order to determine whether and how much of a COLA we can pay. One is the overall inflation rate. One is essentially the 5-year investment rate of return. We call it the actuarial rate of return. It's not exactly the same, but it's close. And then finally, the ERS funded ratio. And it so happens that 80% is the next milestone in that formula that would improve the COLA outcome for our retirees. So that was one of the really key drivers for setting 80% as our objective in the short term. So improving the funding position will also naturally improve COLA outcomes. So I will leave it there and stand for any questions.
Any questions from the committee for the director? I do have one, if I could. So you mentioned the last snapshot, 72.2% was on June 30th of 2022.
Yep.
When will the data be available from the next snapshot? And I'm assuming that'll be June of 23.
June of 23, and the board will approve that valuation report in their April meeting.
Okay. If I could follow up on that, you mentioned that this is a springboard towards getting us towards that 80%. Internally, and just shooting from the hip, when is that projection that we would be at 80%? And dare I ask the follow-up, when do you project if we hit 100%?
So right now we're looking at the late 2030s to hit 100%. This is assuming, which will not happen, but this is assuming we hit all our exact actuarial assumptions, so a caveat. Looking at the late 2030s right now for our 100%, and the late 2020s to maybe 2030 or so for the 80%.
Thank you. Floor Leader Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. How does that stack up? How do we stack up in comparison to other similar sized states with that population of retired teachers and the pipeline of existing teachers and other employees?
Yeah, so I'm not the teachers.
I'm sorry,
system, but
the-
I understand.
The,
I understand
the
your question.
employees' retirement system. I apologize.
I understand your question. So the median funded ratio nationally is about 76%, give or take. It's hard to make direct comparison across numbers. I will tell you that, for example, the COLA decision that we made a couple of years ago to start pre-funding, that by itself added $1.6 billion to our unfunded liability. And we have a commitment from the state to pay that down over the next 20 years. But for now, we recognize that as a liability. Had we not made that choice, we would be funded at 77, 78-ish% right now. And, I would consider that to be an enhancement to the system. So I think it's easily defendable to why we did that.
Okay. And then, not that you can make a guess, but what was the biggest impact to that swing from where you saw the 11% drop? Was it a certain sector of the market, or was it, what are you guys monitoring that you think is going to be that biggest question mark that can impact you? I know we're looking really closely at mortgage-backed securities in my job as a banker, and looking at the bond market, which can sometimes, anybody checked out the mortgage rates right now? So
yeah, fixed income has been difficult for us
Okay.
because with rates rising, the existing bonds tend to devalue over time. If rates are at a more or less steady state now, at least we're going to stop the bleeding there. I don't know if it'll be a net positive for a while. When you're down 11% year over year, you can pretty much say that it was most everything. I think what I would say from actually the lesson of this past year is that a lot of the gains, like I said, we had a pretty good year, 11%. A lot of those gains were driven by the mega stocks, the NASDAQ megas, what do they call that, top 7.
yeah,
and so you're always worried about that, and
volatility.
Something happens to them. Is there a follow-on effect?
Seeing no other questions, thank you for your time and your
Thank you.
input. Director Hawkins, if you want to join us, please. Batting cleanup.
Okay, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, we have two small changes. The first, well, let me say, we're starting at 27.9 on your tracking sheet, and that goes through 27.14. So the first change is all of our programs, all four, would receive the $1,000 supplement back in December. There's a $250,000 reduction based on, I think it was Senate Bill 19, House Bill 19 and 24, that was disregarded. It stayed on the books, and this would just simply be taking it off the books. And then the only real substantive change is with the Georgia Awards in 27.9, and that is a $135,000 increase. And that would be for two additional dashboards that are already in development for additional licenses that are required. And those two dashboards I think you'll find very useful. One is for literacy. If you've tried to find literacy rates in Georgia, it's hard to find. And so we want a one-stop shop where you can find the NAEP, the LETSALs, and the ELAs all in one place. And then secondly, the hot topic, workforce. And so tracking our high school students through college and into the workforce is the other dashboard that's been in development for a while. And we're hoping with another set of data that will be out in June. And so, again, this is for licensing for Georgia Awards dashboards. And just so you'll know, we did do a Google Analytics on the hits for our data and dashboards through Georgia Awards. They're about 3,000 to 3,500 per month. So it's not insignificant. However, we're always in the mode of communicating with chambers of commerce, economic developers, as well as educators and parents. And so that will continue and probably be a lot more robust, especially with the Council on Georgia Literacy and their work. I'm open to any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Members of the committee, if you will, watch your email for our next meetings and when we're going to get together, and those will obviously be published as well. So if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.